ReliaQuest mental performance coaches Dr. Nicole Detling and Derin McMains interview top performers across multiple industries to unpack the strategies and the mindset they use to get the job done. Welcome to No Show Dogs, powered by ReliaQuest. Hey, welcome back to the No Show Dogs podcast, powered by ReliaQuest. My name's Derin McMains. I'm alongside my mental performance coach and teammate, Dr. Nicole Detling. Doc, how's it going?
Yeah, today's a great day to have a great day.
How come? I'm going to put it right back on you.
Give me a reason why not.
Touche. All right, so check this out. We got a great guest today. I am so excited for this guy. He is probably, I'm going to read his bio here in a minute after we welcome to the show, but he is like sneakily one of the most talented people in Major League Baseball that I don't feel, and he's blushing, he's rolling his eyes right now, but I'm telling you, he's sneakily one of the most talented people in professional baseball. When I read his bio later, you'll understand. But we have the Vice President, Assistant General Manager of the Seattle Mariners, Andy McKay, joining us today. Andy, how are you, sir?
I am doing great. Excited to be here, and you're already, I used to be your boss, D-Mac.
Yeah.
And you're still sucking up to me, man. Like,
yeah, that's what I want to dig into.
Yes.
Let's hear some stories.
Reverting back to old habits, Let's
talk about your performance review, D. Come on.
That's it. Yeah, that was my chance. So, hey, but this is why I say this. I'm telling you, when I read this bio, and this is why, Andy, I'm telling you, man, you know this, you won't say this. And that's why I love you so much, your humility, man. But like your career track, your path to this role with the Mariners is truly one of one. Like I'm looking around baseball, you've been in it a long time, and I'm like, I can't find this path to vice president, assistant general manager. So let me just read the bio, and then people, they might not appreciate it if they're not in the world of baseball, but I know others do. So Andy's in his 10th full season with the Seattle Mariners. He was just recently promoted to vice president, assistant general manager back in December of 2024. In this role, he oversees baseball development at all levels, including player and staff development, mental skills, and education programs across the entire organization. He will also oversee the director of player development and help advise in roster building, as well as in installing Seattle systems and programs on all levels. And prior to his role, check out this path. Prior to his role, he spent the previous 9 seasons as the Mariners director of player development, otherwise known as the farm director. And before that, he was the peak performance coordinator for the Colorado Rockies minor league system, beginning that role in September of 2012, before obviously being hired away by the Mariners. And then prior to joining the Rockies, he was the head baseball coach at Sacramento City College for 14 seasons. So college baseball coach, and this is why I bring this up, this path is so unique. College baseball coach, peak performance coordinator with the Rockies, coaching mental skills with their players. Farm director, kind of running the whole minor leagues with the Seattle Mariners, and now vice president and assistant GM with the Mariners. Like truly a one-of-one path here with such a unique background. And so that's where I really want to jump in right away to that question around this path you've had and how you've had to evolve as a coach and leader, moving from the dugout coaching players to now leading coaches and other leaders from the front office.
Yeah. I think the evolution is, it is there. It's a real thing, but may not be, I guess, as black and white as some people may think, because the evolution has always been occurring as you're evolving as a leader and a teacher. And so, how I coached players as a college coach evolved constantly. And so that evolution has been in play for, over 30 years. And it really had nothing to do with changing jobs, if that makes sense. And so, so many of the things that I'm doing now, I was doing in a classroom, as a college instructor. I was doing on a college baseball field. And I don't coach our coaches any differently than I coach players. It's teaching and it's leadership. And I think if you understand the basic fundamentals of those two jobs and you keep the important thing, it's just the job. It's teaching, it's leading, it's helping people get better for their benefit more than yours. you just evolve as to how I can do that better to serve others better.
As you're evolving over time, did you have an intentional growth development plan? Is it organic? Like what's that process look like?
It's both. It's very intentional without a target, if that makes sense. And almost like every job, I always thought I thought I was going to be a college baseball coach forever. None of these jobs that I've ever gotten did I think I was going to get, or was I even trying to get. I had never one time thought about being a farm director when I became a farm director, and had never once thought about being an assistant general manager or a vice president or any of those things. The constant has been the teaching and the leadership. And so the intentionality of my development has always been, a very obsessive, ferocious, however you want to say it, quest to better myself through any and all ways possible, whether it's through, reading everything you can get your hands on, to podcasts that intelligent people are putting out, to networking with smart people who can make me better, from stealing from everywhere, from getting into other domains. And, like, for example, I can remember going into a deep dive on stand-up comedy for months, and how fascinated I was by it and how much of that I pulled out into coaching, things like that. But there hasn't been a lot of, like I said, it's been a very poorly managed career. Like, there was never a trajectory, like I want to do this or I want to do that. And, and it's just been learning for the sake of learning for the most part. And then I guess you do that for 30, 35 years and it does end up taking you somewhere, but none of it was really scripted.
Hey, I got to ask, what did you learn from stand-up comedy that you then brought into coaching?
Yeah. Storytelling. And, I think Dave Chappelle is a genius. And when I watch him work and I start thinking about crafting, a 60-minute, an hour-long show, the number of jokes, the rhythm and timing of it, and if you watch Dave, he will do things like he will have you crying in tears out of laughter, and then he's got you thinking about real world issues, and he's combining the two, and he's weaving in and out constantly, making you think, making you laugh, and bringing you back to common themes throughout. And it's what holds your attention. And that's what so much of teaching and leadership is. It's holding attention. That led me into Seinfeld. And, I remember just being blown away at some of his work habits. He wrote every episode of Seinfeld with the same pen on yellow legal pads by hand, because he thought the process of writing on the paper was stickier than writing on a computer, to begin with. His wall calendars of stacking writing days together and not taking days off. His understanding of how many days he can go without putting on a show before he starts regressing. Reading rooms and pivoting when you realize this is not going well. These people paid for me to come and entertain them, and it's not working, and I need something to go to, which then led to anytime I give a presentation, I've got plan B and plan C. I've always got what I hope is a great story in the back of my pocket that I hope I don't have to use. But if I realize I need to do something quickly, I've got that to go to. Those would be little examples of it. And then, recently what in the last couple of years, going back to this theme of influencing other people and holding attention, I'm like, okay, who does that better than anybody? Advertisers. And that led me down that I will say to this day has been the most valuable thing I've ever discovered, which is, how do we convince people to buy products And then how do you translate that into how do I get people to buy into what I'm selling in terms of content around getting better at baseball?
It's brilliant, man. It really is. Earlier, you mentioned kind of your journey and how you approach your work, and you said it's just teaching and leadership. It's really all it is. You mentioned, now talking about holding attention, and then obviously you mentioned helping people get better for their benefit. If
Yeah.
you could break down just the phrase, it's just teaching and it's just leadership. Like, what does that really mean? Because I know there's leaders listening to this going, what do I do with that? Like, how would you break that down?
So it starts with like going back to our mental skills work that I know the three of us have spent a lot of time on. You're always trying to eliminate clutter and help an athlete target in on the actual task at hand. If I'm a hitter in a batter's box, it's the baseball. If I'm a defender in basketball, it might be the player's hips that I'm working. You have these external focuses that you're trying to stay connected to. So I think for us, we have to do the same thing in our jobs. What is the job? And for me, I'm teaching people and I'm leading them. And if I get disconnected from those two concepts, I'm not doing my job. So I kind of mental skilled my own self into what is the task at hand? How do I eliminate things that take away from this? And how do I build systems that keep me focused on those two things? And they they interchange a lot, they interact together, but over time, and you talk about these evolutions, I look at it like you start with empathy. Okay, can I walk in somebody's shoes, make them feel seen, heard, understood, which is kind of cliche-ish, but it's a cliche because it's true. So how do I meet them where they are and understand who they are as a human, and then understand what their needs are? Because that's leadership. And that's where it starts. I can't lead somebody if I don't know where they are and where they're trying to go. And I think that's one of the evolutions that I've finally realized, that I don't get to decide where they want to go. They're humans. That's servant leadership. I find out who they are as a person, where they want to go. And if you go back to the original concept of the word coach was a term that was used as a mode of transportation. Horses would pull it. The coach of a train, coach section on an airplane. It's about getting from A to B. And if you really study it, you can go back and you can understand where it went from a mode of transportation into academia and then finally into sports. So you try to keep that in mind, and then you understand that I'm not going to influence the two of you by telling you what your problem is and how to solve it. I'm going to influence you when I get to know you and I build a relationship where you're finally willing to share with me where you want to go. That's step one. Step two, I actually have to have some wisdom and some content and some information to solve the problem for you. Empathy, wisdom, and then I have to have the spine to hold you accountable, to tell you the truth. And I've kind of whittled this whole thing down to empathy, wisdom, spine. And that if you just keep working those three things, that's how you influence. That's the umbrella for your teaching and your leadership. And it's how you help people solve their problems. And this is a fascinating topic. I mean, we could go down this rabbit hole forever, but this is really where, going back to the advertising thing, if you look at Nike and Apple, and this was the rabbit hole I went down, and so much of their advertising, that it fundamentally changed that, Nike was just telling you just do it, but they weren't telling you what to do. And they were selling products without showing you products, which was revolutionary at the time. Apple was telling you to think different. They weren't saying buy a MacBook. They were saying think different. And by the way, here's a photo of Ali. And if Ali had wanted a computer, he probably would have bought a Mac, you know? But that really changed my mind set around leadership and influence, and that you have to meet that person where they are and meet their needs, which then you transfer into sport. And before I can talk about win, 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 which is what I need as a coach, I need to be talking about what do you need as a player, you know? And those things can be a little bit different, but I have to take care of step one before we can get to step two.
Yeah, that's empathy,
Yeah,
wisdom, and
I love
spine.
that.
Yeah.
Exactly. I love that simplicity, that empathy, wisdom, spine. There's so much behind that, but it makes it more applicable and practical for people who are leading others to think, okay, how can I apply this three-step model essentially as I'm leading people through? And I think probably, I mean, tell me if you have the same experience, but in my experience, the spine is the hardest part and the one that often gets overlooked in holding people accountable and having those difficult conversations sometimes.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear how you would recommend leaders to grow a spine and be able to attack that number
Yeah.
3 in your model.
And again, I think it's part of the evolution. And I think I would agree with you. I think when it comes to, I think empathy is really hard for people too, because it requires getting over myself. And it's assuming that as a leader, like, again, you think about coaching and like Lombardi, like, we're going to do this for the Packers. Well, let's just start with what the player actually needs. And most of the players on your roster don't even know if they're going to make your team. So if you really think their only concern is winning, when they don't have the safety to know they're actually even going to be here for the end of the season, you're crazy. There's a different step in which is a step getting them on the team and secure that they're going to be here. But I do agree with you on the spine. It to me, it's where the gold is, and it is one of the big separators. You know, and it would actually go back to the first step. You know, have you built a relationship that can hold the weight of the truth? And again, in my evolution, so many of my mistakes were I had the spine, I didn't have the relationship. And so I destroyed the relationship. I shouldn't say destroyed it. I certainly impeded it, I should say, and had to do some repair work because I didn't understand it the way I do now. And so you have to understand that piece of it. And then you kind of get into, okay, I want to lead. I'm going to have to do this. And that's kind of the first step in the process, which I'm just going to take the rep. You know, I'm probably not going to sleep tonight. I'm going to overthink it. But tomorrow morning, I'm going to do this. More than likely, you're going to do it and it's not going to go well because you don't have the skills yet as to how to manage it once you get into it. So there's kind of the first step of like jumping off the high dive. Then there's actually being able to figure out how to pull it off. And so there is an evolution of one, just doing it, having the courage and the spine, but then how do I do it well? And what ends up happening so much is that you get yourself worked up for these hard conversations. And so now you're emotionally unstable. You destabilize the person and their emotions by the content. And now you've got this going. You've got two, both people are emotional. It's not going to work. You have to be the adult in the room, and you have to be, again, it's a hard conversation for a reason. So you have to be prepared that I'm going to go in. It's going to be hard for this person. I can't make it harder. I'm going to have to defuse. I'm going to have to bring the tone down, you know, and I have to have this thing thought out as to how I'm going to maneuver through this and what the end game is. And that goes back to the preparation. So now if I'm prepared, my confidence goes up. and I can manage these things because I know what the end game is. I know what the action steps are. I know where I'm trying to get to. And I also know that if it's not going well, I'm going to pivot and change the goal to just, okay, can we continue the conversation 3 days from now? And that might be a win, you know? And so but I do think this is one of the absolute separators in leadership, because I don't think you can lead without confrontation and accountability. It's part of the game. And so being able to do it well is it's a skill. And we've all been there. Like, we've had somebody tell us truth in a way that really impacted us, and our walls didn't go up. And it's such a gift when somebody can do that for you.
I want to talk a little bit about your time as the director of player development, farm director with the Mariners. You spent 9 years there. And during that time there, Seattle's farm system, the minor league system, was rated as the best in baseball. And the reason why I want to talk about this specifically is because you talked earlier about servant leadership. And I think you also talked about helping people get where they want to go, right? But I would also say this: at the same time, when I was a member of the Mariners with you, standards were very clear, expectations very clear, core values very clearly defined. And when I think about people listening to this right now, I think about some people moving from individual contributor role to a leadership role. And so, how do you continue to serve as a leader while still establishing very clear standards and firing people, right? Because I think that's a tough thing for young leaders. It's like, yikes, I don't know if I can let people go, right? But you've had to go through that, right? You've had to go from the supportive mental skills coach to the person dropping the hammer on people, right?
Yeah.
So just kind of walk us through that process and how you think about that and how you got over, right, those fears and the uncertainties around, this is going to be a hard conversation. Like, what was the process for you to get through those?
Yeah. It's a great question. And it's so hard, between, unfortunately, letting some people go at times, or releasing players. It's devastating to them. A couple of, like, I guess, aha moments I had were, regardless of how I feel about this, it has to be done. And now, can I do it with as much skill as possible, knowing, and you start thinking these things through, like, letting a staff member go. As soon as it's over, they're going to call a spouse. They're going to go home to their kids, and somebody told me something really, I thought, great one time, which was, if you're the person who has to sit with that individual, you owe it to them just to wear it. Whatever emotion is going to come out, let it come out on you, and that can save somebody else, an hour later or 2 hours later. I thought that was really valuable. When you talked about the standards and what have you, I think the art of this is that, how do I create absolute clarity for people as to what the expectations are, while at the same time allowing for freedom within that clarity for them to be themselves. And so, the standards become guidelines, they become guardrails, but nobody can be great at anything trying to be somebody they're not. And the one thing that I know, whether it's a great player or a great leader or a coach, the only real commonality is that they have the courage to be themselves. And 3 things that every great leader does, I can already tell you that's bullshit. I can disprove them all. There are no, the 10 things that's not true. But the only thing that I can come up with is that they have the courage to be who they are. And if you just look around professional sports, you see it. You see the fire breathing, intense, combative coach who's a great coach. And then you see the guy on the other sideline who, is always smiling, is always positive, and he's a great coach. Is one right and one wrong? No. Anything can work when people know it's who you really are, and they trust that authenticity. And so you have to create your standards and your clarity in a way that don't start robbing people of who they actually are, because you can't be confident trying to be somebody else, and you can't be great if you're not confident. And so we have to set up parameters that allow for that individual freedom within those parameters.
I think about all your experience, and there's a lot of different places we can go. And I know we're getting a little bit closer towards the backside of this. And I definitely wanted to do a segment with you around separators, just because you've seen so much. And this kind of goes back to a segment we did with Cameron Brate, who's a former tight end with the Tampa Bay Bucks. And we asked him to kind of, in a few words or less, what were some things that stood out between, the different quarterbacks he played with, whether it's Tom Brady, Jameis Winston, and the different coaches he's had. And so it's kind of in that same idea, but we want to ask you about separators between a few different players, types of players, and then a few different leaders, right? And so, in as few words as possible, right? Let's just start here. Separators between minor league player and a major league baseball player.
Yeah. The obvious is, skill. One's a better player in general. But I've always tried to remove those levels as being the buckets, because I'm more concerned with closing the gap between who am I and who can I be. And because there's underachieving major league players. They're just that talented. And then there's players that don't get out of double A, but that was the best they could possibly do. And so I'm more fascinated by that concept of how do we close those gaps, regardless of, and again, you just think about it. I mean, it could be a high school player that closes the gap to nothing. That's the person we should be studying, because they're the ones getting everything out of what they have, and
Fair.
and so when I think about through that lens, what separates the people who close the gap and people who don't. The one thing that I keep coming back to is the love of what you're doing. Who loves it more? Because the person who loves it more, and I don't think you get to choose what you love. It's that's just part of the mystery of being human. But D, you've done it as a player and a coach. It's like, who loves the bus ride? Who loves the clubhouse? Who loves being in the weight room? Who loves hanging out in the clubhouse after a game? Who the guy who loved to walk up to home plate? And to me, that's the biggest separator. And that's why I think it's so important that people find their passions, because that spurs the curiosity, it spurs the drive, and it sustains you over a long career without getting burned out on something, because you just love it. And it's like when you look at coaching, and Popovich had a great line. He's the winningest coach in the history of the NBA. And now he's leading the Spurs through this rebuild. And he was asked, why are you doing this? Like, you're literally destroying your legacy every night you go out there, because the team isn't in a place to win a lot right now. And his answer, I thought, was so great. He's like, it's just teaching. Whether I was teaching future Hall of Famers how to win a championship, or I'm teaching struggling players how to get over the hump to establish a career, it's the same thing. And I'm a teacher and I love teaching. And that resonated with me so much, that if you can stay connected to those things you love, how powerful it can be. So I think that's probably like the separator for people, because everything falls off of that.
Absolutely. And you blew up the whole segment just with that answer. So there's no reason to even continue on. Now,
I do have a follow-up question
yeah,
on it
go for it.
though.
Go ahead.
So, I mean, I totally agree with you. I mean, loving what you do and every little aspect of it and every little element, and at least appreciating even the suck, right? You can find some love even when it sucks. But I'm curious, in your experience, have you been able to identify when that love starts to fade or
Yes,
when that
yes.
flip switch? Because it absolutely happens. I've seen it time and time again where it just gets old. It just becomes a chore. I loved it when I was younger. I loved it at the beginning, but I've been doing it for so long now that I think for some people that love can kind of fade away. And I'm curious if you can identify when it does, what happens, what do you see, how do you notice that
Yeah.
changing?
And that's a great question because it does happen. And, going back to our good pal, Ken Revisa, it's when does the pressure overcome the pleasure? And, I think it's when you get lost. Why did you fall in love with it in the first place? And then you allow your day to day to get too far away from those things that you love about it. And it's like I saw this clip last night, as a matter of fact, with Tom Izzo at Michigan State. And Jay Wright was interviewing him, and he said, elephant in the room, all these great coaches are walking away from college sports right now around the NIL concept and the transfer portal and what have you. And Tom was basically like, yeah, that's for them. But it doesn't change. I'm still coaching my team.
Mm.
And so it was pretty revealing that, what Tom Izzo really gets off on is coaching and teaching players. And so if players are coming and going, or if they're getting paid more money now or whatever, it doesn't change what he loves about it. And he's not going to allow himself to get caught up in the other things that will take away the love and passion. And so it goes back to that concept of you have to keep creating systems around yourself that allow you to stay focused on the things that you're passionate about, while understanding we all have parts of our job that we don't really like. Like, I'm not passionate about doing my expense report. Okay. I wish I could give that to somebody. I can't. That's part of it. There's a lot of times I don't want to get on an airplane, so this isn't like a fairy tale, but you do have to keep getting it back to, and I'm not going to get lost into things that I can't control. I'm not going to get caught up in what's being said on the internet or what's being written. And in this huge world around me, can I just stay laser focused on, am I teaching and am I leading and am I helping other people get better? And if I can do that with a big enough percentage of my day, I think I'll be good. But if you start drifting away from that, it's just going to eat you up with all of the things that you don't like.
Yeah. I know one thing I often share with athletes, and generally older ones that have been doing it for a while, more experienced ones, it's, don't let the business of sport keep you from the love of your sport, right? Because it's easy to start just focusing too much on the business side of stuff. And I get that for sure. Well, we got to get to, we started a new segment, Andy, this year. It's called Questions from the Arena, where we blast out to our 1,200 teammates in 4 different countries and 6 different operating centers. Like, hey, this is who we're interviewing coming up on the next No Show Dogs podcast. And if you got any questions, fire them away. And, we'll get flooded with emails, whatever. We got to sort through a couple, and we always try to trim it down to 2 or 3. And so we got a couple here, and these are more interview style.
Sure.
And we're just going to fire at you. Doc, I'll take this first one from Hannah. And it's kind of a 2-parter. And so here's what Hannah wants to know. First, what mental skills do you believe are most crucial for sustained success in professional sports? And then the second piece is, what role does self-awareness play in becoming an elite performer? And how do you help athletes or staff develop that critical trait?
Okay. Those are 2 massive questions, Hannah. So,
Yeah.
I think with mental skills, it always comes, I guess I would start with what are mental skills? It's focus. Can I focus on the right thing at the right time and without being distracted? And so, like, now what are the tools that help you get there. And it will lead into kind of the second part of this, but I think if when you think about like bang for your buck, I always like to look at things like what would have been a good answer for this 100 years ago, and what would be a good answer for this 100 years from now. Like that's something we should be trying to manage, right? And if there was one skill, it would be breathing. That, like, regardless of what's going on around you, can you stay focused on your breath and use that focus to regulate yourself and not, the obvious, get unregulated emotionally. Like, to me, that's the most important skill anybody can have. And the breath is probably the best avenue into that. I think about perspective and, the stories we tell ourselves. Can I take a step back and be an observer of the story I'm telling myself and not be so intertwined into it, so that I can actually start laughing and say, this story is just not true. But it's hard for me to recognize that when I'm involved in it. But if I can be the observer, that helps. And so that self-regulation of self-talk is so critical. And then, the other part of how do you teach self-awareness? It's really hard. It's probably the most lacking skill, out there, because again, it requires us looking into a mirror and knowing that whatever is going on in my life, I'm the cause of it. And that's hard for people to accept. But what ends up happening, like, if you can't accept that, you're devaluing yourself, and you're saying, I wasn't powerful enough to be in control of myself. So how am I going to be powerful enough to fix it? Like, you can't have one without the other. And so where does the self-awareness come from? You have to have somebody in your life, preferably more than one, that will be your truth teller. Like, it's just the only way there. And I don't think many people get there on their own. But if you do enough research on this, like, we've all read enough now, whether it's, it's Adam Grant's work, or he would be the most obvious. We're so unaware. And the problem is we don't know how unaware we really are. The gap is massive. And so the first step for me is having a belief system inside that, I'm not an aware person. And that makes me like every other human being on the planet. And that's kind of like the first step in it. And then surrounding yourself with people that'll tell you the truth, constantly eliciting feedback from people that you're teaching and leading. And, we've all had these moments where we realized, my God, I thought X, the world is telling me Y. And I still don't believe it. I think it's a lifelong pursuit. And it really is. So, Hannah, congratulations. I mean, you just threw out two questions that we could talk about forever. And you can go on Amazon tonight and realize, there's hundreds of books written on each topic, and the world really isn't getting any better at them because they're hard, and we talk about this a lot, D, like in mental skills work. And I would actually use this as a separator as a coach. If we want to talk about a player's, say, a swing in baseball, how do you swing a baseball bat? Players will listen to that all day long because you're talking about their swing. But if I start talking to them about being a competitor, the walls go up because now I'm talking about you as a human being. And it's a whole lot more personal. And so that separator as a coach is who can go from talking about skills to the actual person and do it in a way that doesn't force the walls of defensiveness to come up, if you can pull that off, you're an elite coach, because all coaching gets past skill and gets into the person eventually. And you have to be able to cross that bridge. And it's a really hard bridge to cross.
All right. So I have one more question from the arena. This comes from John. John wants to know, in relation to intentional development and self awareness, what advice do you have for identifying actions with the best return on investment? And then he goes on to say, in other words, how can someone determine when the work they're focused on isn't yielding valuable results and their time would be better spent on other tasks?
Yeah. My first part of this is a simple one. Are you getting results? And I mean, it really is simple. Like, every process is perfectly designed to get the result it's getting. Now, where it gets very complicated is sample size. How much sample do you need before you can determine this isn't working or it is? And it's like, I went to the gym and ran on the treadmill and I didn't lose any weight. The treadmill doesn't work. Well, that would be false, right?
Yeah.
But if you go to the gym every day and run on the treadmill for a year and it doesn't work, now you might be going, there's something about what's going on here. And I don't know what that magic number is. But I would tell you, most people, it's too short. And they're making assessments on too small of a sample size. And again, like going back through sport, every team goes through bad stages. Every Major League Baseball team is going to lose 4 or 5 in a row at some point. Does that mean there's something wrong? No. Can I separate between process and luck? Meaning, is this bad luck or is this bad process? Those things all come into play. And I just put it all under the bucket of art of coaching, that it just takes wisdom to start pulling these things apart and differentiating, what's real, what's actionable, what should be ignored. Steve Kerr's got a great line. If your culture is dependent upon winning, you don't have a culture. And, if your culture can't sustain adversity and losing, it's not a culture. Your process, even if it's a good process, has to be able to sustain down periods where it just doesn't work. And it doesn't mean there's something wrong with it. It means you just have to be patient and committed and get through it, because there's nothing as foolproof, I guess. So I'll tip my hat. Those are good questions. Those are hard ones.
We work with some world-class, really smart people. Trust us, way smarter than we are. That's why we go to them and say, hey, what are some good questions?
Yes.
Yeah. Hey, Andy, this has been awesome, man. We're going to wrap up, though, with the same question that we ask every guest that comes on the No Show Dogs podcast. We call this a No Show Dogs podcast because we see ourselves as hunting dogs here, right? It's not about what it looks like. It's just about doing the work, right? As you mentioned a lot, where is it getting results, And so with that in mind, the final question we ask everybody is, when you think back to your career and kind of where you've been and what you've gone through and where you're at to this day, what do you think were some of the things that you were willing to do that others weren't, that has helped you have the success you've had up until this point?
Yeah. The intentional learning, the investment into my own development, I think that was probably a separator. And, again, we can kind of finish this back to where we started with the evolution question and how things have changed. I've gone from reading a ton to now trying to write a ton. And I honestly believe this right now, and I might change my mind a year from now. I think writing is a superpower. And because if you want to influence other people, you have to be able to speak. You have to be able to create clarity. Nothing creates clarity like writing, because it's so hard. Like, if I were to ask you right now, D, I want you to write 2 good paragraphs on simplicity, it would take you a while to make it good. We can sit here and BS about it back and forth for an hour, but when you have to put it on paper and you read it back to yourself and like, that's terrible, that's too long, that doesn't make sense, it's not flowing, And so that act of writing is the ultimate clarifier in your own mind. And then that leads to speaking. It's little things like that I think have probably, helped me separate a bit, trying to stay attached to humility, trying to stay attached, like literally having these constant conversations of, am I drifting towards ego right now? Is this my ego talking? Is it, how can I get back to humility? That, just those inner dialogue things, I think are really, important. And I tell our coaches, I think ego is probably the biggest cause of unemployment in the world. When you kind of start with the end in mind, like, okay, what gets organizations in trouble? Egos, communication, alignment, soft skills. So why don't we try to be great at those? Because we know those are the ones that are going to sink us. I don't even know what your company does, D. I have no idea. But
you need to figure it out. Cybersecurity, brother.
Okay. So what I'm going to tell you right now is what's going to make or break your company isn't the X's and O's of cybersecurity.
Right.
It's the X's and O's of organizational behavior and communication and leadership and things of that nature.
It's outstanding, man. So good. So good. Andy, we appreciate you so much, man. I know people are going to want to follow you, connect with you after this. Where can people find you and connect with you going forward?
Twitter is my only social media. I haven't put a lot on it lately.
Find you on X.
Follow me. So
no, I hear you, man. It's again, thank you so much for just spending time with us, sharing your thoughts, sharing your wisdom along the way. And this is one of these that I guarantee you people will go back and listen to over and over again, just because there's so many nuggets here. And so, Andy, really appreciate you taking time to talk with me and Doc here today and to share your wisdom, man.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Go out and make it a great day, buddy.